us. And today's topic, it is the rule of law, but Yahweh took me in a very specific location, and we want to reach out to them who are in need and understand the significance of why we need the rule of law, and why when you follow the law of the Most High God, it actually helps prevent you from gaining knowledge of certain activities that does exist. So the rule of law is important, and today's topic is not to minimize or to somehow devalue or diminish the individuals who we're going to discuss. Also not looking to diminish any nationalities or put stereotypes on any one nationality. The information that we found out, we can provide for you. And if you want that information, please reach out to us on our social media platform feeds, and we will provide you with the basis of the information, the location of the information, where the core of this lesson was taken from. And again, the rule of law. People look at law differently, and the rule, which is, we're using the term rule as in governance, the governance of the law, the specific need of governance of law. So the scripture says the law was made for the lawless and disobedient. So when we're referring to the rule of law and the significance of making sure that there are boundaries that are set, making sure there are guidelines that are set, all of this is done to benefit not only your community, your society, but is also to benefit the individual. So the law, what is the law? The law is going to be an agreed upon term or condition. A law is things that you can and cannot perform. And the rule, which is the governance, is important. There needs to be boundaries, and there needs to be guardrails on things that you can and cannot do. So when the scriptures are referring to the rule of law, it is looking literally from the throne of the Most High God, which is a 30,000 viewpoint, and it's looking to explain to you why governance in your life, boundaries and guardrails are specific and beneficial to you, and how there should always in your life, you should be able to say, that's a bridge too far. Functioning societies, sorry about that. Somebody got to remember to turn that on. Functioning societies and functioning governments or lasting relationships are only going to experience success if they are established with well-written and agreed upon guidelines, which both parties agree to adhere to. So governing relationships, there needs to be guidelines established, boundaries, guardrails. What are the expectations? And anytime you set expectations, you really are establishing law. And the law, again, is made for the lawless and disobedient. So laws help keep us within a parameter that allows us to grow. And if you want a successful business, if you want a successful church family, if you want a successful government, you're going to have to follow the rule of law. And again, for any relationship, if they want to experience success, there must be well-established, written and agreed upon guidelines which both parties agree to adhere to. Laws need to be followed. Laws also occasionally need updating, because when laws are written, they are written based on the status quo, but there are times when the status quo changes. Environments changes, humanity changes or alter, or there are other variables that must be considered. When that is the case, that's when we look to alter laws. So let's go to Deuteronomy, the 14th chapter, verses 1, 2, and 3. And we want to read concerning what Yahweh forecast for his people. And today we want to break down the significance of two of these very specific laws that Yahweh gave to his people. Deuteronomy, the 14th chapter, we're going to begin in verse 1. Ye are the children of Yahweh your Elohim. Ye shall not cut yourselves. That's a law. Nor make any baldness between your eyes for the dead. That's another law. So we don't cut ourselves, and we don't do things to our body that honor the dead. It's a totally different lesson, but I want you to know that Yahweh is not the Yahweh of the dead. He's the Yahweh of the living. So we don't honor the dead. We honor the living, for the dead knows nothing. For thou art a holy people unto Yahweh thy Elohim. And Yahweh hath chosen thee to be a peculiar people unto himself, above all the nations that are upon the earth. So Yahweh is saying, not only do we not cut ourselves, do we not create baldness between our eyes for the dead to honor them, but Yahweh is separating us. So this is a spiritual segregation. You are in the world, but you are not of the world. So this is a spiritual segregation from the activities, not that we don't interact with those who are not of this faith, but we don't embrace some of their ideologies, and we do not embrace some of their traditions. And what we just spoke about in the first two are traditions, cutting yourself and creating some type of memorial for those people who are now deceased. And Yahweh is saying he's pulling us out from them. He's causing us to be a very peculiar people in how we interact with these other nations and how we worship. And then he says in verse 3, thou shalt not eat any abominable thing. So now Yahweh is telling us that not only are we a chosen people, but there are things that we can and cannot eat. So when you read the scriptures, one must remember the goal is to ensure a long-lasting life without disease or live without medical complications. So when Yahweh outlined what he did for us in Deuteronomy the 14th chapter, the goal was to have long life and to ensure that we live a life free of diseases and a life where we don't have a lot of medical complications. You don't want medical complications. And if there are certain things that you avoid, then you can avoid these complications, you can avoid these diseases, and you can live long. Many nations and in their populations, they have engaged in what we're going to call, it wasn't titled this in Deuteronomy 14th chapter, but we want to put you on the right road to try to help you. But many nations and their populations have engaged in what is called self-harming behaviors. And though the motivations and methods vary, ritualistic self-harm has been practiced in various cultures, such as ancient Maya, some Hindu, Saudis, and Shia Muslims, who may have practiced self-flagellation on the day of Ashura. On the other hand, non-suicidal self-injury, which is called NSSI, often involved cutting, is a modern phenomenon with significant prevalence rates reported in countries like US, China, India, and Japan. So when we first read that law in Deuteronomy 14th chapter, this was written long before these cultures made prominence. But now it is becoming a major problem. The law was do not cut yourself. So do not practice self-mutilation. And now there is a phenomenon. There were other countries that did practice it historically, but now this particular action is furthering itself. It's undercurrent, it's underground, but a lot of people, young people specifically, are getting caught up in self-mutilation. not realistically, so ritualistic and traditional self-harm has been around for centuries. So as we had mentioned before, ancient Maya, so the priest will perform auto-sacrifice through cutting and piercing to draw blood. So the scriptures are telling us, and this practice, not Mayan, but it had traveled to the Middle East, where a lot of this was being written in Egypt, in Africa, in Syria, in all of those regions of the world. So the priest will perform auto-sacrifices through cutting and piercing to draw blood. And the whole goal of them drawing blood and cutting themselves, self-mutilation, they were doing it to honor their God. So I'm letting you know the law that was established not to cut yourself, they were doing it to honor a God. I'm going to show you how it has since shifted, because everyone who practices self-mutilation is not necessarily doing it to honor a God because they don't understand the history. But there is something associated with it today, modern, which is why we want you to avoid it at all costs, which is self-mutilation. And it's something that is not talked about enough, especially in a church, and people don't grasp the severity of it, which is why we want to take the time and talk about some other nations. So Hinduism, they also, some known as sadhists, practice forms of self-harm. So Hindus practice it, the Mayans practice it, even in Islam. Some Shiite Muslims engage in ritualistic self-flagellation with chains and swords to commemorate the martyrdom, which is the killing of Imam Hussein on the day of Ashura. So even in Islam, there are, not all, but there are some Muslims that practice self-mutilation using swords or chains, which literally, the goal of self-mutilation is to draw out blood. And there's a lot there, but we want to continue to read on some of these other nations. So ancient Canaan, that was one of their practices. And then Yahweh even told the people, don't practice the ways of the gods of the nations that I'm going to allow you to take over. Specifically told them, when you take over these people, disregard all that they were doing. So when they went into Canaan land, this was a part of their worship and their practice. Even killing their children, offering up to the god Moloch. So offering up their babies to the god. And in addition to that, in ancient Canaan land, they practiced self-harm, and that was a part of their mourning rituals, according to a Rosh Hashanah tablet. So according to the tablets, which are the writings for the ancient Canaan and their religious practice, in their mourning rituals, and also in their worship to the god of Moloch, they practice self-harm, which is the drawing of blood in these rituals. But they weren't drawing this blood from an animal. They literally were drawing it from themselves. So we see Hindus who are doing it. Islam is not all of Islam, not all of them, not all Muslims, but some Islamic people practice it. Some Hindus practice it. Some Mayans practice it. But in addition, Catholicism, some might be taken back and might have some comments about it, but Catholicism, the practice is referred to as the mortification of the flesh in some branches. So there are even parts of Catholicism that practice self-mutilation. And I don't want to lose sight on what we read in Deuteronomy, the 14th chapter, verse 1. Do not cut yourself. Do not practice self-mutilations. And then in Africa, in colonial Kenya, girls practice a form of self-circumcision as a symbol of defiance against female genitalia mutilation. And we definitely know over in a lot of the African continents, they practice self-mutilation and the deforming of the body. But according to the scriptures, that is not a practice that we want to follow. Now, that's a historical context, and again, we can provide you with all the information for this research to let you know that not picking on any one religion, not highlighting any one nationality, that was a swath of nationalities, backgrounds, Middle Eastern in nature. But now I want to go to the Far East and show you how the scriptures told us not to do it, and how, since the practice continued, we want to pull it forward to today's time. And this is what really struck me and took me back. And I want parents to know and individuals to know, when they see these particular marks, it is self-mutilation, and it has been around for many years. And Yahweh told his children, based on the laws that he's given us, don't do it, because I am separating you. So don't cut yourself. Don't do anything specific on your body to honor the dead. And Yahweh has segregated us to be a peculiar people unto himself. So he called us out from these practices. And he told us, when he gives us Canaan, and remember, it was even ancient Canaan land where they practiced self-mutilation, and they practiced offering up their babies to the god Moloch. 1 in 7, and this one really took me back, 1 in 7, and this is in the Far East, Japanese women aged 20 through 24 have committed self-injury. And 62% of Japanese women who committed self-injury had a history of childhood abuse. So even today, 1 in 7 Japanese women are going through what they're calling self-mutilation or self-injury. And out of that, ages 20 through 24, that's very young. Out of that 1 in 7, those women, 62% of those women have a history of child abuse. So when you're looking at a root cause, anytime there is disruption in your home, there is a potential for this spirit to come on in. That's the first time I said that, and I'm going to outline to you through the scriptures why self-mutilation is actually a spirit, and that spirit is in you to control you. Not only 62% of Japanese women who committed self-injury had a history of child abuse, over 62% of these women also suffer from depression. The link that they are finding between self-mutilation and these Japanese women, and not including if it's your culture because it's a religion or it is a ritualistic part of your faith. I'm letting you know that, so we're going to separate two. Some are practicing self-mutilation because of depression and because of a spirit. There's another group practicing self-mutilation because it's a part of a ritualistic worship. Both go against what we know is the rule of law from Deuteronomy 14th chapter. And I'm saying both, even unintended, are going to carry a spirit with it. So even if you're doing it for a religious purpose, it's going to carry a spirit. And if you are not doing it for religious purposes, it's going to carry a spirit, because the reason why you're doing it is because of a spirit. So let's go back to why laws are important. When you follow the laws of God, you're able to navigate through a third of the angels that were actually taken from the kingdom from the adversary. And the scripture says that Yahshua himself said he beheld Satan fall to the earth as lightning. And then John on the Isle of Patmos says from the angels' testimony, woe unto the inhabitants of the earth, for Satan is cast out to the earth and is angry. So you have Satan, a third of the angels, they're down here causing havoc. One of the havocs that these unclean spirits are causing, and we're going to identify that, is the self-mutilation of the body, and it is continuing to grow. It is so ingrained in human culture that they have shifted it from being a form of depression, which is what it was, of a lunatic nature, which is what it was, which is the historical aspect, depression, lunatic nature, to actually into weaving it into their worship. So these women in Japan, therapists and medical professions, have linked depression as one of the underlying factors as to why these women practice self-mutilation. Let's go to Deuteronomy 15 chapter, and let's pick this up because we want to show you something. Why it's so important to be governed by laws, which are boundaries and guidelines that actually aid you. So when Yahweh says don't do something, Yahweh might not explain to you all of the behind the scenes that you pick up when you do it. Yahweh just saying don't do it. That's where faith comes in. You say, I'm just not going to do it. Deuteronomy 15 chapter and verse 5. It says, only if thou carefully hearken unto the voice of Yahweh thy Elohim, to observe to do all these commandments which I command thee this day, for Yahweh thy Elohim blesses thee, as he promised thee, and thou shalt lend unto many nations, but thou shalt not borrow, and thou shalt reign over many nations, but they shall not reign over thee. So when we look at this law in Deuteronomy 15 chapter, verses 5 and 6, it's telling us that if we obey the laws of God, and we observe and we keep the commandments of God, that we will actually reign over the nations, and the nations will not have reign over us, and that we shall lend unto these nations, and we should not have to borrow from these nations. That's why we are not learning their ways, and we're not practicing their laws. Scriptures are saying the law is this. They should be learning what we are doing. We should not be learning what they are doing. And the reason why that is crafted in that manner is because there is no value in what they do. Value only in the respect of being everlasting and eternal. We who follow the rule of law of the Almighty, who says keep the commandments of God, we are doing that for an everlasting reward. We are not observing the commandments of God for a temporary reward. We are observing the commandments of God on earth to help us navigate through diseases, to navigate through sickness, and to navigate through illness, and to have not a long sustaining life because we want to live on earth forever, but a long sustaining life with our health so that we can enjoy the time that we have on earth until such a time that we get everlasting life and immortality. And in between that, we got to navigate through these nations who don't follow the laws and the commandments of the Almighty God. And the Almighty is telling us that you can avoid self-mutilation and depression if you follow the law of God of do not cut yourself, because you're going to lead yourself to something that is significantly more dangerous. And he says to us who keep the commandments of God that you shall borrow, you shall not borrow, but you're going to lend, and that other nations will not reign over us on earth, not in the kingdom on earth, but we are going to reign over them. That's the benefit of following the commandments of God. You get your life back, you get your time back, and you get to do what you want to do when you adhere to the commandments and the statutes of God. Now, when you read Deuteronomy 15 and 4, it gives you a promise. Deuteronomy 15 and 4 says this: save when there shall be no poor among you. Now, take your time and think about that. If I follow the laws and commandments of God, there will be no poor among us. That's the benefit of adhering to the laws and statutes of God and not looking over to the other nations and being somehow curious as to why they cut themselves. I know why they cut themselves. It is an unclean spirit, or it is a practice that was shown them from their faith. Both go against the law of God. So for us who keep the law of God, we live a life where there is no poor among us. For Yahweh shall greatly bless thee in the land which Yahweh thy Elohim giveth thee for an inheritance to possess. This for us says, if we keep and we follow after the commandments of God, we won't be poor, and we're going to be greatly blessed. That's that health and wellness that we will pick up by keeping the laws of God, and we will eliminate the depression, the confusion, and the sadness and the disease that comes with doing what these other nations do. And he says, Yahweh is going to give us a land, which is our very own properties, that we might possess. Not just possess them. So some people are what they call house rich, meaning they can't do nothing but afford the house. They can't even afford to pay for the water for the house. Only thing they can do is pay the mortgage. Yahweh is saying, I'm not only going to give you a house, I'm going to allow you to be able to afford it and do something else. And there will be no poor. I really tap into that no poor among you. That's what we really, really, really want to look to. So let's go to Jeremiah 10th chapter. Jeremiah 10 and 2. Jeremiah 10th chapter, verses 2 through 7. Thus saith Yahweh, learn not the way of the heathen. Do you see that now? Jeremiah saying, we're not supposed to learn what they do or how they do, but they out there cut themselves. And then we're going to get deeper into that. Yahweh said, don't learn them, because they are, and the word heathen there is ungodless and unlearned. They don't know why they do what they do. They're just doing it. But the scriptures are saying, don't learn that way of that heathen. And then it says, and be not dismayed at the signs of the heaven. That's why we don't follow the zodiac. That's why we don't follow mysticism. This is another law that the Almighty has given unto us, that we don't follow after tarot card readers. We don't follow after people who read signs from the palms, because they are leading us away from what Yahweh promised us. Yahweh promised us the commandments. He promised that we will be greatly blessed. He promised that we will possess our own land. He promised that we would lend and we would not need to borrow. He promised us long life. He promised us good health. But that's if we adhere to the commandments of God. We are adhering to the commandments of God to avoid the pitfalls that are associated with not only living on the earth, but navigating the earth as a third of fallen angels on its shores. It says, be not dismayed at the signs of the heaven, for the heathen are dismayed at them. For the custom of the people are vain. So that's why we don't learn to wear the heathen, because the customs of the people are vain. For one cutteth a tree out of the forest, the work of the hands of the workmen, with an axe. They deck it with silver and with gold. They fasten it with nails and with hammers, that it move not. They are upright as the palm tree, but they speak not. They must needs to be born, because they cannot go. Be not afraid of them, for they cannot do evil, neither also is it in them to do any good. That's why we don't learn the way of the heathen. I don't want you to miss that caveat. We keep the commandments of God. It's not in them to do evil, neither is it in them to do good. Meaning, what you learn from the heathen is not going to benefit you. So they're not trying to do you evil, but it ain't going to work for you. If we take their advice, it's not going to work for us because they have a completely different plan and they have a different executing strategy for that plan. We have a completely different plan. We don't have to be afraid of them. They can't do us evil, but it's not in them to do good. Meaning that if we follow their plan, it's not going to work for us, which is why we don't cut ourselves, because we don't want to bring in the spirits that are associated with it. But there is a lot that is occurring in the world that we don't do because we don't want to draw that into our lifestyles. For as much as there is none like unto thee, O Yahweh, thou art great, and thy name is great in its might. Who would not fear thee, O King of nations? For to thee doth it appertain. For as much as among all the wise men of the nation, and in their kingdoms, there is none like unto you. So Yahweh, according to this writer, is paralleling that out of all the wisdom that is in the world, none of it stacks up to the wisdom that is in Yahweh, which would translate that Yahweh's wisdom is in the commandments of God. And if we adhere to them, then we receive the benefit. So we don't learn the way of the heathen because they are vain. They can't do us any evil, but it ain't in them to do good, meaning that if we take their advice, it's not going to work for us. No matter how wise others appear, there are none as wise as Yahweh. There is none as wise as Yahweh's words. There is none as wise as Yahweh's commandments. Remember, functioning societies, functioning governments, or lasting relationships are only going to experience success if there are well-established, well-written, and agreed-upon guidelines within both parties and which both parties agree to adhere to. Laws need to be followed. Laws also occasionally need updating. When they are written for your learning. They are written for your benefit. And when you follow them, that's when you receive the benefit. So let's peel back the issue of why someone might cut themselves. Let's go to Mark, the 5th chapter, and we want to read verses 1 through 9. So we already read in Deuteronomy, it was a totally different time period. Now we're reading Mark 1 and 5, which is a totally different time period. And I've already brought you to the modern times where over in Japan, it's not just in Japan, but over 62% of the 1 in 7 women who cut themselves deal with depression and deal with some type of an abuse that has occurred to them. So it spans time, which is why we don't learn them. They're going to learn from us. Mark the 5th chapter, verses 1 through 9. Mark 5, 1 through 9. And they came over unto the other side of the sea, into the country of the Gadarenes. And when he was come out of the ship, immediately there met him out of the tombs a man with an unclean spirit, who had his dwelling among the tombs. And no man could bind him, no, not with chains, because that he had been often bound with feathers and chains. And the chains had been plucked asunder by him, and the feathers broken in pieces. They tried to bind him, wasn't successful. They tried to handcuff him, was not successful. Tried to put chains on him, was not successful. Neither could any man tame him. And always, night and day, he was in the mountains and in the tombs crying, and what was he doing? with what? This practice is not new. It has more to do with these fallen angels that have come down to hurt humanity, and to hurt humanity against the backdrop of Christ, against the backdrop of Yahweh being the Father. So this is a man that had a lunatic spirit that could not be bound, could not be controlled, and was often in the tombs cutting himself with stones. I'm letting you know that practice of self-mutilation is not new. Yahweh told us then, don't do it. That's why we follow the laws of God. There are practices out there that Yahweh's telling you through the word. If you keep the commandments of God, you will avoid this in your life. That's why it's so important to make sure that you are following after the laws and the statutes of God, so that this does not become a part of your life. Verse 6. But when he saw Yeshua afar off, he ran and he worshiped him. And he cried with a loud voice and said, what have I to do with thee, Yeshua, thou son of the Most High Elohim? I adjure thee by Elohim, that thou torment me not. For he said unto him, come out of the man, thou unclean spirit. And he asked him, what is thy name? And he answering, saying, my name is Legion, for we are many. This is what you get caught up in if you get caught up in cutting yourself. You get caught up in that realm of unclean spirits, and one of those unclean spirits might be Legion. We're just identifying cutting yourself as one. The other one that the commandments of God tell us not to do are drugs. Drugs are going to alter your direction that the Almighty had. He wants you blessed. Yahweh wants you to prosper, as well as he wants your soul to prosper. Yahweh wants you to be in good health. But when we go outside and you begin to use meth, or you begin to use crack, you're now pulling in all of those spirits that attach to that element. I know it's not cutting yourself, but cutting yourself is only one of the many commandments that the Almighty has given unto us not to do. And now you see, from example in the scriptures, and we've already told you about what's going on in Japan, and that situation is not getting better in Japan. It's actually getting worse among women. And it's still a problem worldwide. And then there are other religions that are practicing this self-mutilation, which means it's not going to end. Anytime you go outside the parameters of the Most High God, that's when you're going to pick up these unclean spirits. That's why Jeremiah says, don't learn their ways, because their way will not benefit you, not the life that you want to live, not based on Deuteronomy 14 that said he wants you doing well. And he asked him, what is his name? And he said, we are Legion, for we are many. Let's go to Matthew 5th chapter and verse 10. Matthew 5th chapter, verses 10 through 15. And he besought him much that he would not send them away out of the country. Now there was nigh unto the mountains a great herd of sweating swine. This is the same man. And all the devils besought him, saying, send us into the swine, that we may enter unto them. And forthwith Yeshua gave them leave, and the unclean spirits went out and entered into the swine. And the herd ran violently down the steep place into the sea. Now, this was about 2,000 swine. Matthew the Mark, the 5th chapter, verse 10. Mark, we were in Mark, we were at the top of Mark, 1 through 9, Mark 5, 1 through 9. And we actually just went down Mark 5 still, and we're at verse 10. Mark 5 and 10. And we're still talking about the same man and how he was uncontrollable. That's what happens when we don't follow laws. We become uncontrollable, unmanageable. That's what happens when you're not willing to work within boundaries. You're not willing to work within guardrails. You become unmanageable. And that's not what you want. And there were swine feeding. And they asked to go into the herd of swine. And there were about 2,000. And they were choked out in the sea. Now, let's talk a little bit of liability here. Yahshua did not own those swine. And when the herdsmen came out there, they were just out there hurting. They was going to feed it. But when the unclean left the man and went into the swine, then they all run off the cliff. So let's talk about liability. Well, whoever owned the swine just lost 2,000 swine. They lost all the revenue of that swine. And scriptures never say if they got it back or if they filed suit against Yahshua. I would say not. But they might have had a tort case and they had standing because they went until they swine. Like, wait a minute, we were just herding the swine. And they ran out. That display was so shocking to the residents of that region that they asked Christ, man, you got to get out of here. We don't know what's going on. We got this man who was crazy. He's not. And now our swine that was not crazy is crazy. What's going on here? It was just too much for him. So they kicked Yahshua out and asked him to leave. And I don't think it was politely. And they that fed the swine fled. They're like, what in the world just happened? And they told it to the city and in the country. And they went out to see what it was that was done. And they come to Jesus and they see him that was possessed with the devil. So they come, they heard about the swine, they come and see Christ, and they see the person that was possessed with the devil and had the legion sitting and clothed and in his right mind, that they were not afraid. This is what we are looking to try to show you with the power of the commandments of God. Even if you were caught up in an addiction, even if you were caught up with an unclean spirit, the commandments of God and the mercy of Jesus Christ can set you free from that. And that's what you're going to need in your life, an ability to be set free. But what we're encouraging to do is not to start it. Believe the word of God. Don't learn these practices. Don't learn these rituals because they're not going to benefit you. This man was only benefited because he came across Christ. The swine was not benefited, but we know that he was cutting himself. There's a lunatic son that the scriptures talk about in the book of Matthew and Luke, and he too was casting himself into the fire. And the unclean spirits in him were causing him to have seizures, and they were also causing him to throw himself down on the floor violently. There are other self-mutilation activities out there, head banging, where people just bang their head against the wall. All of these are unclean spirits that were brought into your DNA because of sin handed down from generation to generation. Yahweh is not only trying to protect you from sin, Yahweh is looking to protect your generations behind you from sin, which is why Yahweh is saying, don't link yourself to these actions and don't link yourself to this stuff, lest you get caught up in it. It is an unclean spirit. It needs to be rebuked. If it cannot be rebuked, then it needs to be medicated and controlled. And depression always follows them who self-mutilate. And that's not a practice that Yahweh gave for his people. The adversary is the only being that wants you to be lawless. But when the law came, it brings peace and it brings stability to life and to individuals. as outlined in the scriptures. When you get the law of God in your life, it puts guardrails, yes. It puts boundaries, yes. But it also gives you long life. And it gives you freedom of disease. It gives you freedom of heartache. It gives you freedom of depression. It gives you a freedom while navigating in this world. Let's go to Leviticus 10th chapter. Leviticus 10th chapter. Verses 10 and 11. Leviticus the 10th chapter. Verses 10 and 11. It says, and that ye may put the difference between holy and unholy. So when we keep the commandments of God and we don't learn the way of the heathen, we are doing that because Yahweh said in Deuteronomy that we read initially, 14 and 15, Yahweh has called us out from among these people. And he's saying, I need you to know that there is a difference between things that you can do and things that you cannot do. All things might be lawful, but they might not be expedient. But he's telling us that you might put a difference between holy and unholy, and between unclean and clean, and that ye may teach the children of Israel all the statutes which Yahweh hath commanded unto them by the hand of Moses. This is what Yahweh wants for us, that we might understand that there is a difference between what we can do and what they can do. We are a peculiar people called unto Yahweh, set aside from the rest of the people, and he set us aside so that we don't have to navigate some of those heartaches that are associated with living in this world. Leviticus 20th chapter. Leviticus 20th chapter, verses 6 through 8. And the soul that turneth after such as have familiar spirits, see, we don't go after them, and after wizards, to go a whoring after them, I will even set my face against that soul. So we don't follow after familiar spirits, we don't follow after wizards, and we don't whore after them, meaning put another God before Yahweh. Because Yahweh said, I am going to set my face, meaning that his favor is going to be against a person, and he's going to cut off that people and that nation from being his children. So he called us to be a peculiar person, but he told us we don't dib and dabble in familiar spirits. We don't. That's a part of our law that we must follow, we adhere to, and we receive the benefit. This is why we don't. That there might be a difference between clean and unclean, that there might be a difference between holy and unholy. And he said in verse 7, sanctify yourselves therefore, and be ye holy, for I Yahweh, your Elohim. Yahweh is holy. So Yahweh wants us to be holy. And ye shall keep my statutes and do them. I am Yahweh that sanctifies you. Again, functioning societies, functioning governments. If they want to last, they're going to follow the commandments of God. There are a lot of nations that practice things that are no longer. And then Yahweh allowed his children to inhabit a land that was already inhabited, but they kicked out the inhabitants, Canaan land, but he told them, don't practice what they practice. That same commandment is to us, not to practice what these other nations are going to practice. Because we have guardrails, we have boundaries, we have things that we do not do, and we have things that we cannot do. We are going to follow after the law of God. So this law of cutting yourself, self-mutilation, you're going to have to be mindful of that. And you're going to have to understand that there are addictions that are waiting for you if you don't follow the commandments of God. And Yahweh is encouraging us to not go down that road. Don't open the box. Pandora had a box. Don't open that box. Don't find out what's down there. We are different. We are unique. We are set aside. And we get the benefit of living great lives where we are a blessing to people. We are sanctified, meaning that we are segregated from the rest of this world. But we are segregated to show them the light of the gospel, to let them know that they too can come in. I don't want you dealing with depression. I don't want you dealing with anxiety. But if you become overconsumed in this world, you're going to battle anxiety. And Yahweh is saying, I don't want you to battle this anxiety. Why? Because Yahweh is with you. And he wants you to benefit. Someone locked the door. He wants you to benefit from the greater portion that is the Word of God. But all we have to do is adhere to it. Thanks again for sitting with us. Hit the like button and hit follow if you learned something new. And you can also catch more content on our YouTube channel and our TikTok channel. Don't miss out. And also, don't forget about our Kroger Community Rewards. If you want to help support the ministry, just go inside of Kroger Community Rewards, select JX228 as well, and Kroger's will send us a proceed to help further the ministry that we have. And you can find out more details of that and other ways to reach out to us on our Facebook page. And again, if you want to know any of the stats or any of the core, we're not highlighting anyone negatively. We're not saying that Japanese women, we're not saying that Muslim women, not saying that Hindu women, we're not saying that anybody is less than. I am saying the practice is not a practice that is for the people who keep the commandments of God. Astrologers, I'm telling you, don't follow it, don't listen. Palm readers, I'm telling you, don't follow, don't listen. People who read bones, don't follow, don't listen. That's not what we do, who are called unto God and to himself, a peculiar people. See you next time and stay tuned. Thanks again and remain blessed.